Did you know there was a time when being a baby was almost a public hazard? Not because of small toys or expired diapers, but because of grown-ups with diplomas who'd say, "What if we tested this on the baby?" Yep, science in the last century was a little too experimental. And their favorite targets? Babies. Because, according to them, babies were pure, neutral, and malleable. Basically, lab rats with chubby cheeks. And the most famous case of all? The classic, Little Albert. Year, 1920. Johns Hopkins University Laboratory. Scientists, John Watson and Rosalie Rayner. Mission, find out if fear can be taught. How? They took a 9-month-old baby, who couldn't even say "Mom," and put him face to face with a white rat. At first, it was all adorable. Albert laughed, tried to touch the rat. It was super cute. Until the scientists started pairing the appearance of the rat with a deafening metallic noise, like hitting a steel bar with a hammer. The result? In no time, Albert started crying just from seeing the rat. Then he began crying at rabbits, dogs, whitebeards, fur coats, cotton. He basically became a walking panic detector. But the worst part wasn't even that. The worst part is that no one knows for sure what happened to Albert after the experiment. Some say he lived with trauma, others say he died young. Oh, and by the way, his parents had no idea it would be a traumatic experiment. They thought it was just an innocent test. Moral of the story? Always ask, "Test for what?" before signing any form. Now, let's spice things up. Literally. In the 1940s, a group of researchers wanted to find out if babies had a natural palate or if they learned to like things. And what was the best way to test that? Giving raw garlic, chopped onion, and lemon juice to babies under 6 months old. Because apparently, mashed banana is for weaklings. The scientists reported all sorts of reactions. Some babies made such intense faces, their eyes nearly disappeared, and others just ate it like mashed potatoes. One of them even licked the entire lemon. The conclusion? Taste can be learned, but some are born brave enough to face a barbecue. And here you are, doing gentle food introduction with mashed fruit. Now get ready, because what comes next isn't funny, it's disturbing. In the 1930s, in orphanages in the United States, like the one in Davenport, scientists wanted to study the effects of emotional deprivation. They literally split babies into 2 groups. One received hugs, affection, laughter, and emotional care. The other? None of that. Just the bare minimum to survive. Food, diaper changes, and absolute silence. No human contact beyond the basics. And guess what happened? Many of the deprived babies fell into total apathy. Some developed mental stagnation. And some died. Not from illness, but from the lack of human touch. A simple hug could have saved lives. And this was documented, published, scientifically approved. Now check this out. A human baby raised side by side with a chimpanzee. No, this isn't a Tarzan movie script. This really happened in 1931. Psychologists Winthrop and Luella Kellogg, yes, like the cereal, decided to raise their son, Donald, alongside a female chimpanzee named Gua. They wanted to know, would the chimp start acting like a human? But the twist? It was the baby who started imitating the chimp. Donald began barking, making strange noises, and even trying to walk on all fours. The experiment was cancelled after 9 months. Not because the chimp became human, but because the human was turning into a baby chimpanzee. And that wasn't the only time the line between science and crazy social experiment got blurry. In the 1970s, some researchers decided to study the effects of extreme sensory deprivation on babies. The idea was simple and disturbing. Leave babies in silent rooms, without color, without toys, without anything for long periods. They wanted to see if the brain would create its own stimuli. What happened? The babies started to show visible discomfort, then sadness, then complete apathy. Some developed emotional delays. The study was shut down when they realized they had invented infant boredom torture. But not all experiments looked bizarre at first. For example, in the 1960s, researchers created a project to test how babies reacted to human voices without seeing faces. So they used puppets with built-in speakers saying human phrases. The result? Confusion, crying, and pure terror. Because, really, is there anything scarier than an adult voice coming from a wooden puppet with staring eyes? Imagine being 5 months old and hearing, "Hi baby, let's play," coming from a box with a cloth nose. And speaking of strange sounds, another group of scientists in the 20th century decided to test babies' emotional reactions to extreme noises. They played metallic sounds, recorded screams, and even sirens close to the baby's ears. And the goal? To see their startle threshold. Because apparently, scaring a baby was a good way to study emotional acoustics. Some babies cried, others flinched, and some just froze. The study was stopped when parents began noticing their children tensed up at any loud sound, like a pot lid slamming. Now let's talk about one of the most absurd ideas in the history of science, the so-called natural language experiment. The theory was, if babies never hear any human language, will they invent one themselves? To test that, in the 13th and 15th centuries, yes, this goes way back, kings like Frederick II of Germany and even Egyptian monks ordered babies to be completely isolated. No one was allowed to speak to them. They were just fed. No touch, no voice, no affection. The result? No language ever emerged. But what did emerge were severe emotional problems. Many of the babies never developed normally. Some never even learned to speak. Yes, even medieval kings dabbled in the so-called science of silence. Adorable, right? Now, here's one that sounds like a joke. The cold bath experiments. In the Soviet Union, during the 1950s, it was believed that bathing babies in icy water would boost their immune systems. So they took newborns, dunked them into near-freezing tubs, and observed their reactions. Some screamed, others went into shock. But interestingly, in some cases, the babies adapted. This practice even became popular in some rural areas for a while. And you? Shivering just thinking about a lukewarm shower. And of course, how could we forget the case of David Reimer, one of the most controversial experiments of all time? David was born a healthy boy, but after a botched circumcision, his genitals were severely damaged. A psychologist named John Money, who strongly believed that gender is 100% social, convinced David's parents to raise him as a girl. They changed his name to Brenda. Pink clothes, girl toys, the whole package. John documented it all as a success story. But in his teenage years, David learned the truth, rejected the identity forced on him, and began living again as a boy. Sadly, he suffered deeply from depression and took his own life. A tragic experiment disguised as gender identity research. If you think you've heard it all, hold on, because when it comes to bizarre experiments on babies, human creativity seems to have no limits. And we're still sliding down that crazy staircase with style. Ever heard of the orphaned babies in the deliberate speech delay experiment? No? Well, this one took place in the 1940s in the United States, in orphanages. The theory was simple and sickening. Test whether a child's speech development would be affected if adults corrected their mistakes harshly, with stern tones, reprimands, even threats. Instead of hearing "good try," children heard things like, "That's wrong, very wrong, say it again." The result? Kids who were developing normally began stuttering, mispronouncing words, or avoiding speaking altogether. That's how scientists artificially created stuttering, and then claimed stuttering could be learned. Congrats, science, on the trauma. And if you thought that was heavy, wait until you hear about the induced malnutrition experiments. That's right. In the 1950s, a Canadian government-funded study gave Indigenous babies in public institutions food that was intentionally deficient in vitamins and minerals. Why? To measure the effects of malnutrition on child development. They wanted to know, for example, how long it would take for teeth to stop growing or bones to weaken. All of this was documented as if it were a plant experiment. But they were babies, real babies, who got sick, lost teeth, and lived with permanent damage. This remained hidden for over 40 years. Now let's talk about the infamous crying test. Yes, that's the informal name. In the 1960s, researchers wanted to measure how long a baby would cry without comfort. The method? Put the baby in a crib, leave the room, and time how long it took for them to stop. If they cried for 2 minutes, great. 20 minutes? Noted too. And they repeated this test at different times of day, over multiple days, with varying background sounds. Some babies gave up crying. Others screamed until they lost their voice. The scientists took notes coldly. Conclusion? Some babies learned to give up faster than others. The famous Learned helplessness? Ever felt like that as an adult? Well, it might have started in the crib. And let's not forget the swimming reflex tests, also known as let's see if this baby can swim. Yes, really. In the 1930s and 40s, psychologists like Myrtle McGraw literally threw babies into swimming pools to see if the swimming reflex was innate. And believe it or not, some babies did move their arms and legs. Others swallowed water like they were bobbing in a punch bowl. And yes, it was all filmed, timed, and charted. Baby 3 kicked with right foot, sank after 4 seconds, burped a bubble. Sounds like a joke, but it was considered science. Chlorinated water, diapers, a stopwatch, and a clipboard. Now brace yourself. Infant electroshock experiments. Yes. In the 1960s, radical psychologists used mild electrical shocks on children, even babies just starting to speak, to correct undesirable behaviors. If the child said something wrong or made a random sound, they received a small electric stimulus to the skin. The kind of thing that today would land you in prison, on trial, in a Netflix documentary, or trending on Twitter. But back then, just another Tuesday in the lab. And to finish with a gut punch, let's talk about one of the strangest and most forgotten experiments in history, the Forgotten Babies of Sound. This study, done in Europe in the early 20th century, aimed to discover whether there was an original human language. So scientists completely isolated babies, ensuring no one spoke to them for months. Caregivers were forbidden to sing, talk, or make sounds. The idea was that, without external influence, babies might spontaneously create a new language. What happened? Silence. No language ever emerged. But what did emerge were developmental tragedies. Some babies were rendered completely mute. Many suffered severe social delays. Others simply didn't survive. Science hoped to hear a new language, but all it got was the sound of emptiness. These experiments, as unbelievable as they sound, really happened. In labs, hospitals, universities, orphanages. With official approval, with funding, with white lab coats. And the scariest part? Many of those scientists thought they were doing something brilliant. But in the end, what do we learn from all this? That the line between science and cruelty was once terrifyingly thin, and that babies, fragile, innocent, defenseless babies, were treated for decades as if they were just lab toys. And as shocking as it all is, maybe the biggest takeaway is this. Are we really that far from it today? Or did we just change the method and turn the trauma digital? So if you grew up with diapers, hugs, mashed bananas, and goofy music from Patati Patata, consider yourself lucky. Because some people started life as just another data point in a weird experiment.